Hey guys, today's story is a little different. Because it starts in a house full of people who smiled at me with empty eyes. I don't usually talk about myself, and especially not about money, but this time, it's necessary. This time, you need to know everything. My name's Jace, I'm 43, and for over a decade, I ran a logistics software company that, by the time I left, was pulling in contracts worth over $11 million annually. I built it from my bedroom, just a guy with a second-hand laptop, coding between shifts, keeping his head down while everyone else at the family barbecue laughed and called him the silent one. Maybe it was easier to joke about me than ask how I was doing. Or maybe they just never cared to look. They saw me, sure. At weddings, birthdays, funerals, I was always there, always on time, always offering to help with chairs or pay the deposit. I thought that counted for something. I thought that made me family. But what I didn't realize, not until far too late, was that I'd never been seen as more than a wallet with legs. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't ask for attention. I just handled things. Paid off my brother-in-law's DUI fines. Paid for my niece's private school. Paid for my father-in-law's surgery when the insurance lapsed. No one even remembered to say thank you. It wasn't about being a wet, it was about being invisible. I married Olivia 10 years ago. She was sweet at first, smart, careful with words. She liked that I wasn't flashy. But I started to notice a tone shift around year 4. That's when her mother started showing up more, and her shadow stretched further than her presence. Maya Dolores has the kind of voice that slices through a room like piano wire. She runs a local real estate firm, and acts like she owns half the city. To her, lineage is everything and I had none. When Olivia got pregnant, Dolores made it clear. You'll need to step up now. You're not exactly a Kennedy, Jace. I remember the words exactly because they were said with a half laugh and a full sting. I was already paying the mortgage on a house that had her name on the deed. I let it slide. For my wife. For the baby. For peace. And then came the endless stream of family requests, none ever framed as favors. Just statements. Can you handle this? You've got this, right? The unspoken agreement was that I was the provider. No one asked what I needed. No one ever did. I watched birthdays go by where I wasn't celebrated, just thanked for footing the bill. I sat at family dinners where Olivia's cousins talked over me like I was furniture. And I tolerated it because I thought that's what love required. I thought if I just kept showing up, someone would see the weight I carried. But when someone only loves you for your usefulness, your silence is your consent. Last year, I had the first real warning sign that I might not make it through this marriage whole. Olivia and I got into a quiet argument, because we never yelled. She asked if I could float her cousin another $20,000. Just until the next flip. I said no. Not even with a hard tone. Just no. She didn't speak to me for a week. The cold shoulder wasn't new, but this one had frostbite. I found myself sleeping in the guest room without even being asked. The baby monitor stayed with her. The house grew quieter. Colder. And Dolores came by more often. She made herself at home. She brought casseroles. Took over the kitchen. Reorganized the living room. For feng shui. I told her once, calmly, "Please don't touch my office." She smiled. Of course not. The next day, my books were rearranged and a photo of her and Olivia replaced the frame I kept of my late mother. That's when I stopped hoping they'd change. That's when I started planning. If you've ever been pushed out of your own life, slowly, inch by inch, you know it doesn't happen all at once. It's not a blowout fight. It's paper cuts. It's every small moment you decide not to stand up for yourself. It's every dinner you don't get invited to, every joke you're the punchline of, every "Can you wire the money by Friday?" text with no context. But I kept notes. not just financial logs. I documented conversations. I saved receipts. I kept a digital paper trail so long it could stretch from their entitlement to my patience and back again. I wasn't plotting revenge then, I was just collecting clarity. Because sometimes, clarity is all you need to realize it's time to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And I knew deep down that one day they'd give me the opening I needed. One comment too cruel, one assumption too bold, one moment where they forgot the man they were speaking to had options. That moment came on a Sunday night. Olivia and Dolores were standing in the driveway when I pulled in from a business trip. I'd closed a deal in Chicago. A big one. 8 figures. I stepped out of the car and Dolores looked at me like I was roadkill. "You don't live here anymore," she said. "Go back to whatever cave you crawled out of, Lowlife." That was the last day I asked to be let in. And the first day they realized I'd never needed the front door. The next morning, I didn't wake up in my own bed. I woke up in the guest room of my beach condo, the one no one in the family cared to ask about when I bought it. They thought I had rented it for client retreats. They never wondered why I was spending so many weekends working. They never asked where I disappeared to when I said I needed space. And honestly, I was grateful for that silence. Because now, it was mine, fully and without interruption. I walked out onto the balcony, barefoot, coffee in hand, the ocean stirring gently beneath the rising sun. I didn't feel rage. I felt a precise kind of stillness. You know, the kind you get when a wound finally stops bleeding? That morning was the first time I didn't check my phone. I didn't expect anyone to call, and I was right. Olivia didn't reach out. Not that day. Not the day after. It took her until the 5th day to send a message, and even then, it wasn't about us. It wasn't about how I felt, or why I left. It was about the optics. "Mom wants to know why you emptied the joint account. Says it's suspicious." Suspicious? I had paid for her mother's new teeth, her sister's down payment, her cousin's legal fees, and somehow, me moving my own money was suspicious. That message told me everything. I wasn't a person to them. I was an account. So I called my attorney. Not the family lawyer, mine. The one I'd kept on retainer privately for years. We met over lunch, and I handed him the trust documents. "You remember when I started this trust after my second buyout?" I asked. He nodded. "Now I want a plan to move everything into a protected shell. Irrevocable. Non-contestable. And while we're at it, I need the operating agreement updated on the holding companies." He leaned back and smiled. "You finally done playing nice?" "No," I said. "I'm done pretending they love me." That week, I went quiet. Radio silent. I let the group chats pile up the memes, the shallow check-ins. I watched my family squirm when I didn't like or respond. When they called and it went straight to voicemail, they started to wonder. But they didn't wonder why. They wondered what it meant for them. By the 8th day, Olivia showed up at the condo. I let her in. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how I'd been. She just looked around and said, "So this is where you've been hiding?" "Hiding," I repeated. "You make it sound like I was afraid of something." She rolled her eyes. "Mom's freaking out. She says you threatened her." I let that hang in the air. "Did I?" "She said you came by and gave her papers." "Facts aren't threats, Olivia." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you really leaving the company?" "I already did." Her expression shifted then. Not sadness. Not confusion. Panic. "You left everything? Just like that?" "No. Not everything. Just the parts everyone thought they were entitled to." I told her about the buyout, about the valuation, about how I'd cashed out before the new investors took over. How the holding company I used for my shares meant that the proceeds were entirely mine. Legally. Quietly. She sat down hard on the edge of the couch. But we have bills. You didn't talk to me. No one talked to me when they called me a lowlife. That was my mother. And you didn't stop her. That silence was louder than any argument. She stood to leave, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out a folder, the one with the prenup she had me sign. Her mom insisted on it before the wedding, back when they thought I'd never be more than a junior consultant. Paragraph 14. It said that any income derived from separate property would remain separate property. The trust qualified. The holding company did too. I'm not here to punish you, I said. But I'm not funding your silence anymore. She took the folder and walked out. No goodbye. No apology. The next day, her sister called. Olivia says you're having a breakdown. She laughed awkwardly. You okay? I'm better than okay. Well, listen, I hate to ask this, but any chance you can float me $5,000? Just until payday? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence do the work. No, I said. That's not something I do anymore. That silence after my answer, that pause before she said, Wait, are you serious? That was the moment I knew I had finally unplugged from the machine. I had been their emergency fund. Their fixer. Their mute, ever-flowing resource. Now, I was just gone. It was intoxicating. The fallout didn't come like an explosion. It came in echoes. Missed calls. Texts that went from curious to cold. Group chats where my name was suddenly absent. I'd been erased slowly, but the problem was they'd erased the wrong version of me. The one they thought they knew was never the full picture. I'd simply stopped explaining myself. And that silence gave me clarity. 3 weeks after I'd walked away from it all, I sat in the executive suite of the most exclusive restaurant in the city, not the one I used to take clients to, not the one Olivia's family flaunted for birthdays. This one was different. This one didn't take reservations from the public. It was quiet, discreet, and it was mine. I'd invested in it years ago, under an alias. My friend James, the head chef and majority partner, greeted me like a brother. I saw the headlines, he said. So did they, I replied. The headlines he meant were from TechCore. They'd covered my exit, speculated on my next move. But they missed the part where I had no next move. That was the play. Leave the board, sell the company's shares, and vanish. But not before locking the doors they didn't know they need. Because what they also didn't know was that the new round of funding, it had a clause, a performance clause tied to one particular system I architected. A system I owned. And when I walked, I triggered a chain of review that would ultimately force a full audit. Meanwhile, back at the house I no longer called home, Olivia was hosting brunch with her friends, pretending like nothing had happened. She wore the ring I bought her, served the wine I stocked, and smiled like everything was fine. Until her card declined. The messages started again. Hey, there's something wrong with the accounts. Then, the equity line is frozen? And finally, did you take the Porsche? I didn't answer. Instead, I took the Porsche up the coast, let it roar along the cliff roads with the wind cutting through the silence. I stopped at a small cliffside motel, the kind that smelled of cedar and salt, and laid out my next move. I called a private broker I trusted and began shifting my assets. Art, crypto, patents, everything quietly reassigned to international shells. The kind of moves you don't make unless you know you're done being part of someone else's story. By the time Olivia showed up at my office, the one she didn't know I still leased under a subsidiary name, she wasn't angry. She was terrified. You're ruining us, she whispered. No, I said calmly. You did that when you decided I wasn't worth defending. Her face crumpled, but I didn't soften. I wasn't cruel. I was clean. Precise. She asked what she was supposed to do now. I told her the truth. Figure it out. The same way I did, when none of you believed in me. She left, and I watched from the window as she stood by the curb, unsure whether to call her sister, her mom, or an Uber. In that moment, I realized she never truly stood on her own 2 feet, not because she couldn't, but because she never had to. That night, her mom emailed me. The subject line read, "Family emergency." The body was a single sentence. "You're not being fair." Fair. The word tasted like rust. I drafted a reply but didn't send it. I didn't need to anymore. I was living in a world where I no longer owed them the courtesy of explanation. Instead, I forwarded the email to my assistant with a note. Blacklist this contact. Permanently. The next morning, I walked into my new office, not corporate, not flashy. Just mine. It sat above the jazz club I quietly helped renovate. Every morning now began with music, not meetings. With intention, not noise. And when I sat down to open my notebook, I wrote a single line at the top of the page. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I'd spent years being their warmth. It was time they felt the cold. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with being invisible to people who once demanded you shine. It's not bitterness. It's not even sadness. It's just clarity. Like standing outside in the cold after a house fire, watching it smolder, and realizing you never really liked living there anyway. That's where I was, outside their house, metaphorically and literally. I'd gotten an invitation, if you could call it that. Olivia's younger cousin was getting married, and, in a bid to save face, I was included on the guest list. Not as husband, not even as family friend. Just a placeholder. Probably a mistake made by someone still unaware of the full fallout. And yet I showed up. In a suit tailored so clean it could cut glass, with a calm in my eyes that made people second-guess their assumptions. The venue was opulent, the kind her family always loved: high ceilings, champagne fountains, violinists in the corner like ornaments. I walked in alone. Heads turned. Some leaned over and whispered. A few had the audacity to approach with fake warmth, and even faker apologies. We've been meaning to reach out, one end murmured. You always were so brilliant, another chimed, like rewinding their words could undo the past. But I just smiled. Not out of forgiveness. Out of power. Because when you don't need them anymore, not for approval, not for belonging, there's a silence that roars louder than any insult they ever gave you. I made my way to the seat they assigned me. Table 19. Near the back, right next to the kitchen doors. Right where they put the vendors, the overflow guests, the people they hoped wouldn't be seen. So I made sure I was seen. I stood, walked to the main bar, and quietly told the manager, switch the playlist. He looked at me once, recognition dawning. Yes, sir. Exactly 6 minutes later, the jazz band paused mid-performance. One of the violinists tilted her head as if receiving an earpiece cue. Then she adjusted her bow, and the room shifted. The notes rang out, not classical, not generic, but unmistakable. My song. Not some generic pop ballad. A melody I'd written myself years ago, before the first round of funding. A tune I'd tucked away into a licensing portfolio under a different name. That song was now tied to a successful ad campaign for a luxury car brand. It was my signature. My silent mark. And suddenly, everyone turned. The whispering stopped. Eyes widened. Olivia's mother dropped her fork. I stood still, hands in my pockets, not smiling, just waiting. And when the song reached its crescendo, I raised my glass, not to the bride, not to the family, but to myself. A quiet toast. The kind you give when you know the moment is yours. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched, unsure what it meant, but knowing it meant something. The groom's father approached me later and asked directly, "That was your piece, wasn't it?" I didn't answer. Just looked him in the eye and said, "I hope they paid their performance license." He blinked. "What happens if they didn't?" "Nothing. Unless I decide to notice." He backed away slowly, suddenly aware he was out of his depth. That night, I didn't stay for dessert. I didn't wait for goodbyes or awkward hugs. I walked out the same way I walked in, quietly, purposefully, and unbothered. But the echoes followed me. Because sometimes you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to be undeniable. Outside, my driver opened the door. As I stepped in, I saw Olivia on the balcony, watching. She didn't wave. Didn't cry. Just stared like someone who'd finally realized they'd misunderstood the story from the start. Because I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the victim either. I was the chapter they skipped only to realize it held the entire plot twist. After that night at the wedding, I didn't hear from Olivia for a long while. And I didn't expect to. I had left no traces behind, no shared bank accounts, no ties to her family's precious property holdings. I had spent months disentangling my name from the infrastructure they relied on without ever seeing it. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about becoming a ghost with leverage. I'd cashed out of the company quietly, yes, but quiet doesn't mean small. My exit package alone could buy the neighborhood I grew up in. Twice. But I didn't flaunt it. That was never the point. Power doesn't scream. It whispers through contracts, NDAs, and sealed investor exits. And it moves in places Olivia's family had never dared to go: tech accelerators, infrastructure bonds, AI research labs. I was everywhere they couldn't see, underwriting industries they'd barely understood. I moved into a brownstone on the other side of the city. Old brick, ivy on the facade, no name on the door. It was the kind of home that told you nothing but meant everything. The neighbors didn't know what I did, and that was fine. They just knew I was always calm. Always quiet. And the mailboxes never overflowed because I didn't wait for things to come, I moved first. Then came the day she called. It was late afternoon, early fall. The kind of day when the light gets soft but the truth cuts harder. I saw her name flash on the screen, and for the briefest moment, I remembered the sound of her laughter before it turned sharp. I answered, but I didn't say her name. Just, "Yes?" There was a pause. Then, "I didn't know you wrote that song." I knew she'd get to it eventually. "It's beautiful," she continued. "Everyone keeps talking about it. Too felt like you were sending a message." I didn't correct her. Sometimes letting someone believe they're the main character is more strategic than stripping them of the illusion. She kept talking about her family unraveling, about her mother facing an IRS audit. I didn't have to ask how that happened, and about the investors who had started backing away when they realized I was gone. "It's like everything you touched is still alive," she said, a tremble in her voice. I almost laughed. Because yes, that's exactly what happens when your value isn't ornamental. It roots itself deep. It outlives you. "I think we should talk," she finally said. "About us," I replied without pause. "There is no us. Just a history. And I've already filed it." Silence. Then the softest, most desperate whisper. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said, and it was the truth. "I just stopped needing your version of love." And that was it. No blow-up. No accusations. Just a quiet, final click. Weeks passed. Then the invitation came. Olivia's mother was throwing a charity gala at one of the city's oldest luxury hotels. The same hotel, incidentally, where I had recently acquired a majority ownership stake through a holding firm. Not public knowledge, not on any of the flashy headlines, but legally airtight. I RSVP'd. Yes. I arrived precisely 10 minutes late enough to draw eyes, not late enough to be rude. The ballroom glittered with chandelier light. Tables were set with custom gold-rimmed china. And there they were, the whole clan, faking grace with trembling hands. I approached the host desk. The maitre d' blinked when he saw me, then stood straighter. Welcome back, Mr. Lorne. And then, with a subtle glance toward the open floor, he added, Your table is ready. As always. Olivia's mother watched the exchange from across the room. She started to rise, as if to protest, then froze when the head chef emerged from the kitchen, walked straight to me, and gave a crisp, respectful nod. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because when the chef salutes you, the room pays attention. I walked past them, my former family, the people who had spent years pretending I didn't belong, and took my place at the table dead center, marked reserved. Not in the back. Not near the servers. And not a soul dared to follow. The evening unfolded like a symphony of poetic closure, each course plated with precision, each glance in my direction a tremor in the illusion they built. Olivia's mother tried to laugh too loudly. Her father drank too quickly. I watched them from my seat, perfectly centered, not just in the room, but in their unraveling. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And clarity, when earned through years of humiliation and silence, is the sharpest blade in any room. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. That's the thing about quiet revenge, it speaks louder than any public spectacle. My presence at that table wasn't a declaration. It was confirmation. That I was never the outsider. I was the thread they pulled until the entire tapestry came undone. At one point, Olivia approached the table. Not with the fire of confrontation. With the hesitance of someone who realized they'd miscalculated a heart they thought they could reshape. She stood there, silent, waiting for me to invite her to speak. I didn't. I sipped the wine, let the silence do its work. Finally, she said, I didn't know you were still watching. I looked up. I wasn't watching. I was building. That line hung in the air longer than her apology could. Because it told her everything. I hadn't waited for her to come around. I hadn't paused my life in the hopes of reconciliation. I'd been moving. Quietly. Strategically. Powerfully. She tried to explain. Said her mother's words weren't hers, that the pressure had gotten to her, that the family didn't understand what we had. We had a future, she said. We had plans. We had silence, I corrected. When it mattered most. She stepped back, wounded but respectful. That was growth, I'll give her that. But it wasn't enough to rewrite the history. The jazz band began to play. Not just any song, mine. The one I had composed under a pseudonym, the one that had quietly climbed the charts after being picked up for a streaming series. A piece full of minor keys and quiet defiance. As it played, heads turned. Conversations dimmed. People whispered. And Olivia's mother? She sat down. Because now she knew. That night, the executive director of the gala man I'd met in a previous boardroom, though he didn't recognize me in this context, approached my table. He praised the music. Asked about the melody. I just nodded and said, it came from a place of clarity. He smiled, unaware of the deeper cut in those words. I stayed until dessert. I didn't linger for praise or confrontation. I simply left my card with the host, tipped every server triple, and exited as quietly as I had arrived. In the weeks that followed, I saw the ripple effect. The charity's next event? Mysteriously underfunded. Olivia's family, once proudly plastered across social circles, found themselves slowly edged out. Not by scandal, but by absence. By the power of being removed from conversations they used to control. And me? I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't post revenge quotes on social media. I kept building. My tech firm, now focused on ethical automation, hired former underdogs like me, people who knew what it meant to be looked down on, to be dismissed at someone else's table. I donated under aliases. Funded scholarships for kids told they weren't good enough. Quiet victories stacked one on another. One day, I walked past the restaurant where Olivia's mother had first denied me a seat. New management had taken over. The old sign was gone. The menu had changed. The staff looked happier. I stood across the street for a moment, not out of nostalgia, but reflection. Then I turned and walked on. Because true revenge doesn't need witnesses. It just needs results. I'd become the table. And they could never sit at it. In the end, it wasn't the silence that hurt the most, it was how loud their absence had once been in my life. Every decision I made, every dollar I earned, every quiet act of generosity I used to do it hoping someone in that family would finally see me as worthy. But the truth is, their validation was never the prize. It was the illusion. What mattered was what I built when no one clapped, when no one believed, when I sat alone at tables they never even knew existed. That's where I found my value. You see, revenge isn't always about making others feel small. Sometimes, it's just about reminding yourself that you were never as small as they made you feel. And when you rise without asking for permission, without seeking applause, something shifts. The power you used to hand over, you hold it now. Firm. Calm. Undeniable. People like Olivia's mother, they live loud but shallow. They insult with empty confidence. But people like us? We build in silence. We rise in the shadows they cast. And one day, without needing to raise our voices, we become too powerful to ignore. That's the kind of revenge no one sees coming because it doesn't explode. It echoes. So if you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, pushed aside like you didn't matter, remember this. You don't need their table. You just need your own vision. One built with patience, discipline, and quiet fire. I didn't just leave their world. I replaced it with one where respect wasn't begged for, it was earned.